Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's 1 o'clock and we might kick off our session right now. So welcome, my name's Paul Ritchie. I'm the General Manager of Corporate Services and Commercial at AusActive. Welcome to our session, which is the first of our Financial Fridays that we're running throughout the month of June. Today we're privileged to be joined by Craig James, the Chief Economist at CommSec, who'll be providing an update on the Australian economy and current business environment, particularly focusing on the aftermath of COVID. For those of you that don't know, CommSec is known for innovative, user-friendly reports, including the State of the States, CommSec iPhone Index, and the CommSec Home Size Report. In his role as Chief Economist, Craig is responsible for interpreting big picture economic and financial trends for customers, clients, and staff. As well as providing presentations for those stakeholders, Craig appears regularly in the electronic and print media. In particular, you may recognise his face from Sunrise. Craig has worked in banking, finance and journalism for 42 years and holds both bachelor and master degrees in commerce economics, which were undertaken at the University of New South Wales. In February 2012, Craig was appointed an adjunct professor at the Curtin Business School in Perth. Craig is married with 3 20-something children and currently lives in Huntleys Cove, just to the north of Sydney. Outside of work, Craig is passionate about keeping fit, predominantly via running and lifting weights. Before I pass over to Craig, please be aware that today's session is interactive and we welcome Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat function, but we'll certainly have a session at the end where we can have those discussions with Craig. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and greetings to all of you wherever you're dialing in from across Australia. So certainly, yes, something that yes, it is always important to me in terms of being active, and I have been yes a member of the Sutherland District Athletic Club for quite a number of years. I used to run yes across country. Now basically yes just do sprints. Been a little bit less active in terms of doing yes that over the past 12 months or the past couple of years. Basically, because you know, sort of COVID, you know, sort of I'll blame that, you know, sort of rather than anything else. But certainly, you know, sort of when you're sitting on your backside all day, for like me, you know, sort of you try and you know, to keep as active as possible. So I try and do you know, sort of a couple of weight sessions during the week, and yes, to get out there and run. I do run masters athletics for the sprint distances. Anything up to probably you know, sort of 800 metres. Unfortunately, the people in my age group are still too fast for me. You know, sort of, so it's becoming a challenge for me to be able to keep up. But I've got a very active, you know, sort of daughter as well. You know, so who's a swim teacher here in Sydney, and the two boys, you know, sort of run, you know, so longer distances. I don't know how they manage to do it, but get up to the half marathon, you know, so marathon, you know, sort of areas. So. Good luck to them, but you know, so certainly you know, sort of too far for me being a sprinter. Anything more than you know, so one lap of the course, one lap of the track is a little bit too far. In terms of the presentation today, I think we'll just get that up on the screen. You know, so unfortunately, what they call you know, economics is the dismal science, and we very much you know, so live up to that. You know, so in terms of this opening slide. The chart on the left basically is representation, you know, sort of COVID. You know, then we've got the war in Ukraine, you know, so on the right-hand side. So yeah, it's hardly an inspiring start to the session. But what I will get you to do as you go through the session today is there's one simple question to be able to get real value out of economics, and that's basically saying, so what? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my customers, my clients, my friends, my family? Think about it in practical terms. How do I need to respond to that? What sort of questions do I need to be asking? Should I be speaking yes, more to the staff here in yes, the head office in New South Wales and in Sydney and Melbourne, you know, sort of to be able to get you know, sort of a little bit more information. So what initiatives you know, sort of can I put in place to be able to either protect my business or to grow my business? So certainly I want you to be thinking about it in terms of your own particular situation. Now, if we go over to the next slide is probably the most important slide in terms of the presentation today. This is the T's and C's, if you like, the terms and conditions. We'd like to call it the compliance slide. And basically what it says is, I haven't whipped around. I don't know in terms of your own personal circumstances. So this is very much of a general nature. So no specific advice is used in terms of the presentation today. We move on to the next slide. And this is where we're going in terms of the chat today. The presentation was entitled "Living with COVID," and that's effectively what we're all doing. We've got through, I suppose, the hard part. We got through the lockdown situation. The good news is that governments and central banks and the like have stimulated the economy and provided us with a healthy sort of economy, so that we can sort of effectively live with COVID. We still have super low interest rates. We still have governments providing a degree of support. So certainly that remains very, very positive. But the stimulus effectively isn't required anymore. Our economy is growing at a pretty fast rate. In fact, the figures out this week show 3.3% annual growth in terms of the economic growth or the GDP figures, and normal growth is around about 2.25%. We're doing something like 3.3% growth. So it certainly shows that the Australian economy is in very, very good shape. So we're now all living with COVID. Clearly, there will be an issue when people continue to get sort of COVID and to be down for 7 days. But we need to be able to pivot and respond to that situation. Of course, we've got the other situation that is affecting things globally as well as locally, which is the war in Ukraine, particularly in terms of higher prices for petrol as well as energy more generally. There's a term that's come out of the situation that we've seen over the last couple of years called supply chain, which used to be just basically economic jargon, but now it's more or less dinner party conversation. Supply chain effectively means when businesses have got active COVID cases, that restricts their production of things like goods and services. You've still got people demanding those goods and services, but the supply isn't keeping up. And that's why we're seeing prices to go through the roof. So the prices of a whole range of different items across the globe, it may be cars, it may be sort of petrol, it may be sort of demand even for health and fitness circumstances. We've got strong demand out there, but sometimes so we can't live up to that with the supply. And we think about so the fitness industry, you may have some skill shortages, which is preventing you from tapping into the full opportunities which are available to you so in the current environment. So this is what we're seeing at the moment, where we're living with COVID. People are still getting the COVID sort of cases, and that's restricting our ability to be able to meet people's demand. So we are seeing prices go up and sort of wages go up as well. As I mentioned, there's a range of job shortages happening at the moment because we just don't have people skilled up. We've also had people's changes in circumstances as well. They've responded to COVID and said, look, I want to change the way that I study, I work, the recreation. People have been changing and thinking about changing sort of a whole host of things in their lives. So certainly, so we'll talk about that in a bit more detail going through as well. We do have a strong economy, as I mentioned. We had some really good economic data out this week. We've got a very tight job market, low unemployment. We've got sort of housing prices, which still generally rising across Australia, although we've probably reached the peak of that. We've got strong construction industry as well. So there's lots of areas of strength in terms of the economy, and that's why we're seeing the Reserve Bank lifting interest rates. And next week, when the Reserve Bank meets on Tuesday, we are likely to see a further increase in interest rates. Now, that's something that you probably need to focus on. If interest rates are going up, if there's cost pressures around the place, how do you respond to something or other like that? In terms of your business, if your cost of borrowing is going up, how do you be able to get more revenue in to be able to meet those higher costs? So there's opportunities as well as challenges that are presented by the fact that interest rates are going up. And of course, then we've got the small matter of a changing government. And we have to get across what the new government is likely to be providing. If we go to the next slide, there's some data that came out recently from the Bureau of Statistics, which allows you to get down to some fine detail in terms of industries about what's happening in terms of sports and recreation activities, in terms of the sales, the cost pressures, the profitability and the like. And of course, as we know, the sports and recreation industry covers a whole range of sub-industries, subsectors. and individuals, so covering, sort of different parts of the sectors as well. So, but what we have seen in terms of the macro data for the sector is that profitability remains pretty good. And that should be a degree of encouragement, the fact that we've gone through these crisis periods over the last couple of years, particularly with COVID, and we're coming out the other side and profitability remains very, very good. Of course, going forward, there's no guarantees on that. To be able to make sure that you've got a profitable business, you continue to have to work on that. Of course, for the Health and Fitness Centre, the fact that the cost of living is going up gets people to think a lot harder about where they're going to spend money going forward. So what you will need to provide is a strong rationale why people need to maintain things like their fitness membership, their gym membership going forward. So the importance of that, so in terms of not just the person's, well, in terms of the person's total life, not just in terms of their business or their work focus, but particularly in terms of, sort of having a strong and healthy, sort of body to be able to do the sorts of work that they need to be able to do. So there will be spending priorities that people will weigh up. And of course, that will provide a challenge for operators, in the industry. Of course, what you're all probably seeing at the moment is the fact that costs are going up, and you need to be able to manage those costs going forward. And it may be that you may need to speak to other participants, in the sector, other members of AusActive, as well as the staff in the Sydney Melbourne office, see if you are finding some challenges, in terms of that. As I mentioned beforehand, we've got a tight job market, and that's affecting the ability of people to operate in this industry as well. You're not just getting the staff that you need to be able to go forward. So you need strategies to be able to attract and retain staff. As I mentioned beforehand, the higher interest rates are coming, and certainly that provides some more challenges. And even things like weather, where across the eastern states, you may not have seen it so much out of the west, but yes, across the eastern states, we've had significant sort of amount of inclement weather. And that does provide some opportunities, particularly as getting into the colder months of the year, rather than the people getting out and about themselves. They sort of will gravitate to wanting to go to things like gyms, and personal trainers, in house inside, sort of rather than outside in the cold and the wind and the rain and the like. So we'll go on to the next slide. And basically what we're talking about is the global economy. You can see what happened with the COVID came through, how activity in the manufacturing and services sector sort of plummeted. And then sort of as we responded to that crisis and came out of lockdowns and started to reopen again, you can see what happened in terms of global economic conditions. So that is something that is common for a lot of countries around the world, particularly in terms of Australia. We bounced back quite nicely. One of the other challenges that's going through at the moment is that in China, they've got a different sort of strategy with COVID. It's a zero COVID policy. What they want to see is 0 cases of COVID across China. That's led to shutdowns and close downs in terms of China. And now they're only just starting to reopen. Of course, that's important because if Chinese production is restrained, that means we don't have the goods being produced. That means we do have prices going up, and we see some higher cost pressures. So that's why we always say focus on China, see what's happening in terms of China. The good news is they're coming out of lockdowns. That may mean sort of production will start to lift, and we may see an easing of some of the price pressures. The next slide focuses on what we're seeing here in Australia. And you can see the chart on the left-hand side shows the trim mean inflation, which is an underlying measure of prices of inflation, and also sort of wages. And you can see from that the prices have basically been going through the roof, up 3.7%, the underlying rate of inflation, but wages only growing at a 2.4% annual rate. Of course, a lot of people, sort of who work in offices like myself, sort of the Commonwealth Bank, we don't have the opportunity to get salary increases every day of the week. It tends to be once a year at review time that tends to happen. So I think when we come up to review over the next 6 to 8 weeks, what we are going to see is more people pressing their businesses and saying, I want a salary increase, because if I don't get a salary increase, I know that there's plenty of opportunities outside this firm. So the wage pressures are only starting to pick up. and I think we are going to see wages growing at a higher rate, so going forward. One of the other things that's affecting, particularly in terms of inflation at the moment, is what's happening with the cost of petrol. Now, ordinarily, to highlight things like higher oil prices, I'll put the NYMEX or the Brent crude price down there. But I think it's more important, particularly for our businesses, to be able to focus on what people are shelling out in terms of the monthly cost of petrol. And that puts it in no uncertain terms. You can see that people are shelling out a whole lot more at the petrol pump. And the simple fact is, the so what of that is if people are spending more in terms of petrol, they've got fewer dollars to be able to spend in terms of other spending items like going to gyms, using personal trainers, and the like. So that's why that spending on petrol is very, very much the focus. It's probably the single biggest purchase that most households make, so on a weekly basis, filling up the car with petrol. And if those prices continue to rise, clearly that provides some constraints in terms of what people are able to spend. So the good news is that OPEC overnight has indicated that they want to increase more oil onto the market. So if we can get production lifted from the key producers, then we can put some downward pressure on those prices, and that would be positive in terms of reducing the cost pressures on our budget. The slide that you got in front of me on the left-hand slide shows a recent one from the Reserve Bank. And I want you to focus on that red bar right at the end of that chart on the left-hand side. That basically says that businesses, around about 55% of businesses expect wage growth of more than 3% over the next 12 months. So that just highlights the challenges going forward. People's expectations, businesses' expectations, and people's expectations is that wages are going to be rising, going forward, and that's one of the challenges that we're going to see in terms of our business, in terms of hiring, some more staff. On the right-hand side, you've got where we think things are going in terms of prices, and our view is that certainly prices are up at the moment, but fewer people are going to be getting COVID going forward. Once we see most of the people getting it once or twice, so the opportunities that we'll see greater production by businesses. So greater output, more supply, meeting that higher demand. As a result, prices growing at a slower rate. And that's what we expect over time. Wages to be lifting because of the tight job market, and prices to be coming back down as more businesses operate normally. The next slide basically shows our economic growth here in Australia, and I won't spend a lot of time on it, but the bottom line is the Australian economy has been growing at a very, very solid rate. Last calendar year was the fastest growth in 23 years, and our expectation is for the next couple of years, we're still going to see pretty good growth. It's happening not just in terms of Sydney and Melbourne, it's not just happening in terms of Brisbane and Adelaide, it's happening right the way across the Commonwealth. So you can see the bounce in terms of states, what happened when COVID hit, the bounce as we came out of lockdowns, and where we are growing at the moment. So that is quite encouraging. The next chart basically shows the rankings of our State of the States report. What we do have, we do a report, as Paul mentioned right at the very beginning, we do a report called State of the States. That's available on the CommSec website. There's a lot of good stuff available on the CommSec website, by the way. If you're a member of CommSec, that you can get the daily reports that we put in terms of the economy. Follow things like Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn as well. You'll be able to get access to a lot of reports which are free. That's a very important word to mention in the current environment. They're free reports, and hopefully they will provide you with more information on what's happening in the economy. The chart here is basically showing where the rankings are from our State of the States report, and at the moment Tasmania is number 1 from Victoria number 2, and then we've got Queensland and West Australia equal 3rd position. This will change over time, but overall what we have seen is the smaller economies like Tasmania has been doing very, very well. I think that is changing over time. We're going to start to see an improvement by some of the other states and territories in terms of relative performance. You can see unemployment rates for the states on the right-hand side there. Places like Tasmania and New South Wales have got record low unemployment rates at the moment. Western Australia's unemployment rate at 13.5-year lows. That just brings home in no uncertain terms that we're seeing very, very strong job markets. Right the way across Australia, we've got unemployment rates below 4.5%, which is quite remarkable. Now, the next slide, well, the next two slides contain a fair bit of detail. Now, certainly, sort of because I've got the T's and C's slide or the compliance slide, yes, attached to this presentation. If you want a copy of this presentation, speak to the organisers and they'll be able to shoot you a copy of the presentation through. I wanted to present on these two slides what the ALP's key policies are. We had a change in government. Clearly, yes, there is different focus on, and you probably want to know what's likely to happen, yes, going forward. One of the big changes will be comprehensive childcare. If the government's picking up the bill for childcare, that will be positive in terms of unlocking some dollars for families to be able to utilise elsewhere. So watch that change. Once that change comes through, there may provide opportunities for your businesses. There's greater spending on things like aged care, greater spending in terms of things like education and defence, yes, going forward as well. In terms of housing, there's likely to be a new policy, so allowing people to get greater access to the housing market as well, with only a 2% deposit. So there's some encouraging, sort of news there. Certainly, the focus of the new government is to address cost of living concerns, and therefore, so this will be front and centre for our industry to be able to see what they're providing and where those extra dollars can be channeled in terms of our business. The next slide again, sort of is a bit more of that detail in terms of the ALP's sort of policies. So if we go on to this slide, a couple down, so now with the heading of consumer focus. The chart on the left-hand side is a really interesting one. It shows how consumer sentiment has been fluctuating with petrol price. And I suppose that's really no great surprise. Shows you there's no great rocket science involved in terms of economics sometimes. It can be sort of just the simple sorts of things. If the price of petrol is going up, people know they're filling up more at the petrol bowser, and that's affecting their sentiment levels. So certainly that is something that we've got to watch out for, because it has a key influence on the way that people are feeling. The good news is that despite the fact that sentiment is a little bit on the soft side, there are more jobs out there, and people have been saving over time during COVID. So that's enabled them to spend more. So you can see the latest figures on retail spending. We had those out yesterday, and it shows that we've got very, very good growth in terms of overall spending in terms of the economy. Clearly, there's some challenges going ahead with interest rates going up and petrol prices remaining high. But it just goes to show you, despite sentiment being on the negative side, we have got spending going forward. That's because there's more people out there in the job market. Now, the next slide focuses a little bit more in terms of the health and fitness area. The Commonwealth Bank does a report in terms of credit and debit card spending, and I've got them to extract the fitness card spending. Now, in terms of a fitness card, basically that category includes things like sporting clubs, recreational clubs, country clubs, and the like. So it may not totally apply to your business, but it gives you an idea of how the spending has been tracking over time. You can see what happened when COVID originally came through. We bounced back. Then we had the next phase with the Omicron cases, and now we've bounced back yet again. Going forward, the outlook for health and fitness spending is a little bit more choppy. The latest reading that we had showed that spending intentions for health and fitness were down by 14% in the latest month. So when cost pressures are rising, when interest rates are going up and petrol prices are going up, people have to think in a much more detailed way about their budgets. And that's why it's very, very important that we're at the forefront of understanding what people's concerns are and realising sort of that for us to be able to get people sort of to our businesses, we've got to continue to be responsive to their needs and their concerns in terms of overall spending. So again, so if you get a copy of the presentation, you can go through that slide in a little bit more detail. The next slide basically sort of highlights how businesses conditions have been faring. This uses a survey from the National Australia Bank, and it's one that we look at on a regular basis to show how business conditions are and business confidence levels are. Again, you can see what happened when the COVID came through, and as we came out of lockdown, we bounced to record highs in terms of business conditions. But now we're having to deal with new issues, things like the war in Ukraine, with the cost of living sort of going up, higher petrol prices and the like. But overall, businesses are actually in pretty good shape. And this chart on the right-hand side from the Reserve Bank shows that profitability in Australia at the moment is at record highs. The figures that came out Wednesday this week, a couple of days ago, again showed that the profits are actually doing pretty well. That may surprise you, the fact that Australian businesses, Australian firms are doing very, very well in the current environment. That's because people have been able to hold on to their jobs, unemployment's low, people are spending some more money, businesses are getting that income through managing the cost pressures and increasing profitability. Now, clearly, sort of for that situation to be maintained going forward, you've got to continue to keep a watch on that bottom line, particularly in terms of the cost pressures. The next chart shows you what's been happening in terms of the job market, and just shows you nationally where we are in terms of the job market. You see that the unemployment rate nationally is sitting at 3.9%. The last time we had a figure like this was 1974. Now, I may remember it because I'm super old, but most of you probably don't remember it. But well, we haven't seen an unemployment rate like this since the mid-1970s. So it is quite remarkable. There's plenty of jobs on offer. SEEK came out with new figures today showing that further growth in terms of job opportunities. And so the big challenge that we've got in terms of the industry at the moment, the health and fitness industry, is attracting and retaining staff and the cost of staff as well in terms of wages. And that will be one of the challenges that we've got going forward. The next slide mentions the housing industry or the building outlook. What we are seeing is lots of activity. So a lot of builders sort of got work at the moment. A lot of tradesmen sort of got work. One of the challenges at the moment is the costs are going up, and the wages in the building industry are going up, and that's putting pressure on some of those firms. But we've got very strong activity. We're just basically not getting access to the materials that we need or the labour that we need, and therefore costs are going up. And it just shows you that sort of right the way across Australia, this is very much a common feature at the moment: higher wages and higher prices, and the need for us to be able to manage those cost pressures in the current environment. In terms of home prices, we've already started to see home prices soften a bit. So we've had a pretty good time in the housing market over the last couple of years, home prices rising. But now, rather than being the opportunity for sellers, I think now is going to be the opportunity for buyers. If you have got your deposit, you've got your job, wages sort of rising for where you are, then you do have the opportunity to be able to pick and choose a little bit more. Now, I think that's going to become much more of the case for the buyers in the market going forward. The ascendancy is really with the buyers because home prices are likely to soften as we see a reduction in terms of demand, more supply of homes on the market, and prices probably flat this year and declining in 2023. And again, we have to think about that in terms of individuals. If you're a first home buyer, that's great news. If you are purchasing your property, you'd rather the value of that property go up over time rather than going backwards. And that's a consideration, particularly if you own your home outright. So got to remember that there's different people out there. It's going to affect them differently. If they're renting, of course, rents are going up at the moment, which means there may be the opportunity to move from the rental market into purchasing sort of homes. We're on the downward straight, or the home straight sort of now. Now we'll talk about the interest rates and the share market and the like, and then we'll basically finish up. I didn't realise that sort of is actually running on time at the moment. Economists don't run on time. The economists usually run very, very slowly in terms of presenting the information and tend to go over time. So hopefully we will have plenty of time for questions. And if you haven't got time for questions, sort of later on, or you don't provide me enough questions for me, I'll sort of offer some of my own further observations myself. So there's the opportunity for you to be able to ask anything that you want. So when we get up to question time going forward, interest rates, they have clearly sort of gone up. What we have when we're looking at interest rates is we tend to focus on the cash rate, which is run by the Reserve Bank. And of course, we did have about a month or so ago, we had an interest rate hike of 0.25%. We're likely to get another 0.25% interest rate hike on Tuesday, or even more than that. Yes, there's a lot of economists talking about 40 basis points or 50 basis points, 50 basis points being half of 1%. So the Reserve Bank is basically saying we don't need super low interest rates anymore. We don't need emergency level interest rates. What we can have now is an interest rate which is more appropriate with a fast growing economy. So it's likely that interest rates at the short end will start to rise. You can see what we've represented here is interest rates for going through to 1 year, 3 year, out to 10 years. And the bond market or the swap market that you may be familiar with, they provide sort of guidance about where interest rates are likely to go. And you can see for some time we have seen interest rates rising as longer term interest rates have been rising. That's factoring in the fact that the economy is doing well, that inflation is a little bit higher, and then we don't need super low interest rates, and those shorter term interest rates need to rise. But the writing's been on the wall for some time. You can see in terms of longer term interest rates that they've risen around about 1.5 to 2 percentage points since the start of the year. So certainly interest rates have already been rising, and anybody sort of looking at fixed term interest rates for housing know that's always going to be the case. You're probably kicking yourself a little bit, sort of, if you didn't get in and fix your rates probably sort of 9-12 months ago, because they were at basically the all-time lows. You'd have to go back to the 1950s to find something so lower than what we've been seeing so recently. But interest rates are a little bit higher at the moment, and we've got to factor that in to our own personal circumstances, in the fact that we may have to be paying sort of more in terms of mortgage repayments. If people are paying more in terms of their mortgages out there, again, they will have to think about their spending priorities. And again, that's something that you and your business may need to be sort of mindful of, sort of what's happening in terms of interest rates. The next slide shows what's been happening in terms of the Aussie dollar. The Aussie dollar is that blue line you can see on the left-hand side, and you can see that that's been quite volatile over time. When we think about the Aussie dollar, we've got to think about the sorts of things that we produce here in Australia, things like iron ore and coal and gas and the like. Prices of those sorts of things have been going up, and as a result, the Aussie dollar has been going up as well. But more recently, we've seen a little bit of an easing in some of those prices across the board. The Aussie dollar has come back down. So there's two factors really that if you're thinking about the currency and worried about where the dollar is going, think about what we produce here in Australia and the cost of those things like iron ore. That has an influence on our currency. Also, interest rates here in Australia compared with other parts of the globe. We offer higher interest rates here in Australia. We're likely to suck in more money from the rest of the world to respond to the higher interest rates that we've got here domestically. So what we have had in recent times is US interest rates have been rising to a faster rate than what we had here in Australia. And as a result, the greenback has been quite strong. Overnight, there was these expectations that perhaps US interest rates won't continue to rise and go through the roof, that they will stop at some point in time. And as a result, the US dollar lost some support, lost around about 1 cent against the Australian dollar overnight. So we're sitting over 72 cents at the moment in terms of the Aussie dollar. That's good news if you're planning that trip overseas. Good news if you're planning on buying some imported equipment as well in terms of your business. Not such good news if we're thinking about some tourism sectors here in Australia. The chart on the right-hand side basically shows how Australia's share market has been performing against some major global markets like the US Dow Jones and the German DAX. And you can see that the Australian share market since the start of this year is down by a couple of percent, 3 or 4% down for the start of this year. Got to remember that US and German markets are down closer to 10% on the start of this year. It just shows you the fact that our economy has been strong. The prices of our goods have been sort of rising. And as a result, the currency has been supported as well as the overall share market as well. I mentioned before some of the earlier slides about the fact that the Aussie profitability of companies is at record highs. Clearly, so that's a key influence in terms of driving the share market as well. If companies are doing well, it should be reflected in their share price and reflected in the overall measure of share prices in the economy, like the All Ordinaries of the ASX 200. And that's the bottom line. Our economy has been doing well. Profits have been made. That's why our share market is holding up quite nicely. The outlook. The next slide shows, yes, there is a significant amount of uncertainty. I'm stating the bleeding obvious, of course, but there's a lot of things that are happening. How quickly are we going to be bouncing back from living with COVID? When will normality, sort of finally, sort of be restored? There's still lots of people, sort of wearing masks around the place because of concerns about, COVID. Clearly, so how long is it going to take to be able to get production up as people return to their work? The war in Ukraine, unless you've got the private telephone number for Mr. Putin in Russia, most people still don't know when that war is going to end. But of course, it will have powerful influences on the global economy when that war does end. We may see the oil price come down. If the oil price comes down and people are forking out less at the petrol pump, that's good news for a lot of retail, sort of businesses more generally. They have the opportunity to be able to get, some greater spending, happening going through. So inflation's uncertain about how high interest rates need to go to be able to contain all of this. Reversal of themes. What we've had in the COVID, environment is people have decided to change their behaviour, change the way that they've worked, change the way that they've lived, change the way that they've studied, and also their fitness and activity levels as well. Will we see a reversal of those themes going forward? So that's why we need to be always on the ball in terms of what's happening in the broader economy, so we can basically tap into the opportunities that are provided. Commodities very much in demand at the moment. Will that be the case? And China, we can never go past China. China is our major trading partner. Big influence on the global economy is something to be able to watch out for. The next slide is an interesting one. It's just highlighting the fact that things have changed significantly in recent times. That COVID has prompted us to do a lot of things more differently than what we've done in the past. We may not be working 9 to 5 now. We may be working different hours. We may be working more in the office rather than at home rather than the office. In terms of the way that people are working out, that may have changed as well. So the question is, are we going to see continued changes in behaviour going forward? We look at the job market, and you see on the left-hand side that most people who are unemployed generally have lost their job. And that's what tends to happen over time. The businesses has gone under, or people have been retrenched and they've lost their job. But what we found in terms of the latest figures that came over and highlighting the strength of the job market is more people have left their jobs voluntarily in the past quarter rather than those people who have lost jobs. And that just shows you the fact that people are saying, look, if I'm not getting a decent pay, I'm not getting decent conditions, therefore I'm going to change my job, I'm going to retire, I'm going to study more, I'm going to go into business myself. And we've had a record number of businesses being created in the last quarter, according to the Bureau of Statistics. People are wanting sort of better jobs as well, rather than sort of where they are at the moment. So just highlights the strength of the job market and something that we need to be able to focus on. There's something like 700,000 people out there that are wanting to change jobs at the moment. Which just highlights the challenges for businesses at the moment to attract and retain staff, but it also shows the fact that one of the positives going forward is people are going to get higher wages, particularly if they're moving jobs, they're more likely to get wage increases. If you've got higher wages and you've also got your job, you've got extra spending money, which you may want to see directed in your business out there rather than some of your competitors. Let's go to the second last slide and show some of the things that we need to be focusing on. The jobless rate at the moment is 3.9%. The Reserve Bank wants to see it between 3 and 4%. So we can tick that one off. Effectively, that's where it is at the moment. But inflation is a bit on the high side at 3.7%. So the Reserve Bank would like inflation to come down. And the way of doing that is to be able to lift interest rates, slow down the economy to a more sustainable pace, reduce some of the upward pressure on prices, and get inflation back into that target band. The other thing the Reserve Bank would like to see over time is wages going up to around about 3% or a little bit higher. At the moment, it would be saying that wage growth is still a little bit on the low side. It's its expectation, though, that wages will continue to pick up over time. But these are the three influences that are most pressing in terms of what the Reserve Bank is likely to do in terms of its interest rate settings. And finally, the last slide is the typical last slide from an economist, presenting things like economic growth figures and inflation, the unemployment rate. You can see our expectation for the cash rate. Some are of the view that interest rates in Australia will get to 2.5 or 3%. Ourselves at the Commonwealth Bank Group believe that people have taken on a lot of debt over the COVID period at super low interest rates. And that means that it's going to take smaller changes in the interest rates and the interest rates not as high as they were in the past to be able to slow down the economy. So that's something that's our view. We'll see how it transmits over time. But our view is that because people have got a lot more debt happening at the moment, the smaller interest rate hikes will have a big impact in terms of slowing the economy down. You can see over time that we expect the Aussie dollar to rise as the greenback softens a little bit. The aggressive rate stance by the US Federal Reserve has been effective in getting inflation to peak. And that's something that we need to watch constantly. If we see a peaking of inflation in key countries like the United States and Europe, that will mean that central banks need to be less aggressive in terms of lifting interest rates. And that may mean that we see better improvements on the share market and also better improvements in terms of retail spending. So I have spoken for a fair time today. I'm out of breath at the moment. I'll need to probably take a glass of this water that's been nicely provided. But I'll open it up to questions, and I think Paul is adjudicating the questions there. So maybe Luke and or Paul may be able to provide me with the questions that you've been submitting through the presentation today.
No worries. Thanks, Craig. Absolutely. Everyone, please do continue to put some questions in the Q&A. To start off with, we do have one from Barry Elvish, our CEO, and that's: how do we convince the new federal government to invest in the exercise sector when we know that the return on investment and budget savings on preventative health is approximately 4 to 1?
Well, I suppose it's always a case of putting your case forward to the parliamentarians. It was a much more positive period, a couple of months ago, when the election was on, making sure that your local member had a stance on in terms of this, and making sure that you were making representations. But now you have got a new, probably have got a new member of Parliament. It may be the same, it may have changed, but you're just going to make those representations going forward. The members of Parliament, whether it's the federal or the state or territory, the members of Parliament, are there to be working for you. And what you've got to make sure is that you're presenting the case at an individual level of a business as well as at an industry level from Oz Active. So I think all you can do is sort of say that you need to present your case, present it in facts and figures, present it with some key strategies as well. Of course, parliamentarians always like things to be worked out for them. So if you can say, here's some of the things, some of the initiatives that you can put in place that certainly will make you look good in terms of the electorate and in terms of your own party. So this is something worthwhile to be promoting. So all you can do is basically make sure you're putting those proper representations coming through and coming up with the concrete some measures. It may be something that you do in terms of the Sydney and Melbourne offices, that you can coordinate some of the speaking notes, some of the initiatives that you could utilise yourself as individual businesses with your own local members. Clearly the case, it's always good news to present the information from on high at an organisation level or an industry level, but also from an individual businesses, and making sure that the parliamentarians know what's happening with you at the coalface and some of the things that you can provide to them to show them what's going on in society.
Fantastic, thanks for that, Craig. Another question that we have from Roger is the electric vehicle sector going to rise with demand, and are lithium and other stocks a good investment?
Well, lithium has had a bit of a correction in the last couple of days. And what we had is one of the brokers, Goldman Sachs, suggested that prices for lithium were peaking, and we're likely to see some degree of correction happening in terms of the lithium producers. We also had one of the Chinese electric vehicle makers. They're trying to target some of the African producers in terms of their supplies. So and that could push out some of the Australian suppliers. And we've also had some, Argentina is one of the biggest suppliers of lithium in the world, and it looks like the Argentinian government via their customs area is trying to interfere in terms of the market. So in terms of that lithium, if you're investing in lithium stocks, certainly there's a degree of volatility that's happening at the moment, so watch that fairly carefully. In terms of the cars, well, certainly my wife and myself are driving a hybrid around the place at the moment. She wanted to do something for the environment and thought about it in terms of electric vehicle. But one of the things that we stopped short of is, well, we didn't want to go to a full electric vehicle because we're unsure about how many outlets there were around the place to be able to charge your vehicle. And I think that's one of the big issues at the moment, that people are keen to be able to buy electric vehicles, but if you haven't got the charging places, if you haven't got the resources available to be able to do the maintenance and the charging of those cars, then people are going to be a little bit more reserved about it. So I think we are going to see probably supply respond to that higher demand over time. But the other thing that has to occur is the cost of electric vehicles needs to come down. And we know that will happen over time. The major producers are committed to producing more and more electric vehicles over time. In fact, some of the key producers say in a couple of years' time, the only thing that you'll be able to buy from us is electric vehicles. So if we're all forced to run around in electric vehicles, clearly we're going to have governments and industry bodies responding, and even the car manufacturers are responding over time to make sure that the charging capabilities are there. Certainly it is beneficial in terms of the cost situation. We know that we're filling up less at the petrol pump because we're able to use electric as well as petrol in our vehicle. But it gets down to the fact that more of us are going to be demanding over time, and that is going to see the situation change.
Thank you. We have a question from Luke. You were talking about the concerns around higher interest rates and people taking on more debt. So where do you see interest rates flattening out at?
Well, the chart that I had in the presentation shows you that where we're thinking about in the Commonwealth Bank Group anyway, is that the cash rate will peak at a level of 1.6%. So we're looking for February next year that the Reserve Bank will lift rates to 1.6%, and then it will sit back and they're basically determined from that point of view whether it needs to go further or whether it's gone far enough. I always take the view that we don't have all the answers at the Commonwealth Bank Group. We like to think that we have it sometimes, but we may not have all the answers. But sort of check in terms of some of your local banks where Westpac owns it, NAB, sort of some of the other economists around town, see what their views are, weigh up those sorts of things in your own mind. So just to understand what the influences are in terms of interest rates. And that will give you, I think, a little bit more comfort about where rates are going forward. So where we're sitting at the moment is 0.35. So that's the cash rate at the moment, 35 basis points. It's not even 1%, it's 0.35%. So certainly interest rates are still super low. They are going to move higher over time. And as I say, our expectation is that it'll move from 35 basis points to effectively 160 basis points or 1.6% going forward. But we're of the view that people have taken on a lot of debt over time, and that small changes in interest rates will have a big impact in terms of people spending. Now, the first rate hike probably doesn't touch the sides because a lot of people have been paying off their home loan at a higher rate during the COVID experience, super low interest rates, not able to go overseas. People had extra spending and paid down their home loans. So the first rate hike probably won't touch the sides. The next couple, though, people are going to be thinking a lot harder about their budgets and about how much they're spending elsewhere. And again, that provides a challenge for us in the industry to be able to say, if interest rates are going up and people have got fewer discretionary dollars to be able to utilise, we want to make sure that they utilise it in our business rather than going down the road, utilising it in competitors or sort of going to cafes and restaurants or wherever it happens to be, rather than sort of doing it sort of in terms of gymnasium or personal training.
Excellent, thank you for that. Another question from Timothy. Do you know the lag time between price volatility cessation, i.e. flatter inflation, and improved consumer confidence? And what's that been traditionally?
It does vary over time. Yes, it's nice to have some sort of rule book sort of going forward about what happens. When we think about consumer spending, one of the key influences in spending isn't so much the sentiment level. And of course, people may be feeling a little bit more reserved in the current environment. And you would be, wouldn't you? You're seeing petrol prices high. We've got sort of talking about a cost of living crisis that's happening across Australia because of things like gas and electricity prices. Certainly, this is happening right the way across the globe. So it's not we're not immune to it. Here in Australia, we're very much a part of the more general situation. Consumer sentiment is only part of the equation. More importantly, is whether people have got a job or not. So if you've got a job and so that job is very secure and perhaps your wages are rising, that's much more important in terms of your spending power and what you're going to actually do in a physical sense, rather than sort of just fretting about that in terms of the sentiment level. So that's always more than one factor that determines what people are going to be spending on. People's jobs, their confidence about jobs, wages, they're key factors, as well as things like what we're forking out elsewhere, things like sort of petrol and the like, and also in terms of what's happening globally sort of as well. What we have generally find too is things like outside factors like elections. We've just gone through an election period. A lot of people just don't like to spend through an election because of concern about sort of what if I sort of pick the wrong what if I spend too much money at the moment and sort of the policies aren't sort of activated by sort of the governments coming through. So there's more than one influence out there, and so that makes it more difficult to be able to say what the reaction function is likely to be.
Thank you. We have a question here. Do you have any CommBank information on the cost to the health and fitness industry from the draconian lockdowns?
Well, certainly, yes, the charts that I provided, yes, in the presentation today did highlight, yes, what we've been seeing. We've got credit and debit card activity that we monitor, and then we can sort of monitor at a Commonwealth Bank level in terms of individual sectors. So that report comes out on a regular basis. If you Google that or you go to the Commonwealth Bank website, you should be able to find Commonwealth Bank credit and debit card spending, or card index, I think they call it. But so the Commonwealth Bank, I work for CommSec, which is part of the Commonwealth Bank group, but our economists at the main part of the group, the Commonwealth Bank, sort of economics area, they're the ones that provide the data. But if you look for CBA spending data, you'll be able to see the chart come through in terms of that. We also do something called the Household Spending Intentions Report. And what we do is monitor a range of things. We look at things like Google searches for things like health and fitness. We look at things like credit and debit card spending. We look at sort of searches sort of on the internet sort of as well. So that gives us an idea about where people are likely to spend going forward. So that's called the Household Spending Report, or Spending Intentions Report. Look out for that one as well. That should be available in terms of the website as well. If you can't access that, let the office know in sort of Sydney and Melbourne. Your Commonwealth Bank rep, Dilhan, he may be on this call at the moment. Hopefully, so he is. So he may be able to provide access to that report for you. So certainly, sort of liaise with our Commonwealth Bank rep, and so that we can get that report out to you.
Excellent. I think that's all the questions that we have, Craig. So I just wanted to say that, fantastic session, really informative. We really appreciate what you've given us. I think there's some really great takeaways there for all of our audience today. Before we do sign off though, I just wanted to remind our members that from the 1st of July, AusActive membership fees will be increasing for the first time since before the pandemic. The increase to our fee structure is still well below pre-COVID levels. So we're encouraging everyone to take up this offer right now to lock in a price freeze before the 30th of June. And that'll just allow us to continue to provide quality services and deliver great benefits for our members. But once again, a big thank you to Craig for joining us today. We all hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'll just keep these QR codes up on screen right now, just to allow you to scan those, and that'll direct you to our website. Thank you again very much.
Have a good afternoon.